Apparently owning a lake cabin and having friends is now a crime. My neighbor called 911 and told police I was hosting a dangerous gathering of 30 wild strangers. Reality check, it was 12 guys eating grilled fish and talking about back pain. Then she claimed I was illegally monopolizing the community dock, which, fun fact, was built by my grandfather. That's when she made her power move, handed me a fake fine from a fake HOA she invented herself. I thought I had a weekend reunion. Turns out I walked into a petty dictatorship run by a woman with a clipboard and zero chill. Ever had a neighbor so delusional they try to charge you rent on your own land? Comment below with your wildest HOA or neighbor horror story. I need to know I'm not the only one who got surprise governed. Now let me set the scene properly. My name's Daniel Bailey, and I inherited this beautiful lake cabin from my grandpa about 5 years ago. The place sits on pristine waterfront property in Minnesota, complete with a private boat dock that Grandpa built back in the 80s. I work as a boat restoration specialist, so this place is perfect for me. Half home and half workshop. Every summer, I host this reunion with my college buddies. Just a quiet weekend of fishing, grilling, and catching up on life. We're all in our 30s now, so the wildest thing we do is argue about whose turn it is to buy beer. This particular Saturday started like every other reunion. 12 guys, same as always, gathering around the grill while I cooked up the walleye we'd caught that morning. The conversation was typical middle-aged guy stuff, talking about kids, mortgages, and how our backs hurt more than they used to. Tom Bradley, my quiet neighbor who owns the local hardware store, had even stopped by earlier to say hello. Everything was peaceful, exactly the way these weekends should be. That's when the squad car pulled into my driveway. Officer Robert Dawson stepped out, looking slightly embarrassed. "Hey Daniel, sorry to bother you, but we got a call about a massive party going on here. Reports said there were 30+ people, loud music, possible drug activity." I gestured to my 12 friends who were quietly eating fish and looking confused. "This is it, officer, just our annual reunion dinner." Robert looked around, counted heads, and shook his head. "Well, someone called about a major disturbance. Mind if I just do a quick walk around to cover my bases?" I told him no problem, knowing he wouldn't find anything because there wasn't anything to find. As Robert was finishing his unnecessary inspection, I noticed movement from the rundown rental house about 100 yards away. There she was, standing on her porch with binoculars, taking photos like some kind of surveillance operative. The woman looked to be in her late 30s, wearing clothes that somehow managed to be both flashy and disheveled at the same time. Her hair looked like she'd been too angry to bother combing it properly. This was my first real look at Rachel Smith, though I didn't know her name yet. What I did know was that she was watching my property with the intensity of someone planning an invasion. Robert finished his walk around and came back shaking his head. "Everything looks fine here, Daniel. Whoever called this in either has very different ideas about what constitutes a crowd, or they're seeing things that aren't there. You guys have a good evening." As soon as the squad car pulled away, the woman with the binoculars started marching across the grass toward my property. She was carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression that suggested she thought she was about to deliver some kind of divine justice. My friends started exchanging glances, the kind of looks that said they were ready to pack up and avoid whatever drama was about to unfold. "Excuse me," she called out, waving her clipboard like a weapon. "You can't have that many people here without proper permits. This is community property and there are rules." I walked over to meet her at the edge of my yard, keeping my voice calm and friendly. "Hi there, I'm Daniel Bailey. This is my family's property and we're just having a quiet dinner." She looked at me like I'd just claimed to be the King of England. "I don't care whose name is on some old papers. There are community guidelines and you're violating them. I'm Rachel Smith, president of the Lakeshore Community Association, and I'm here to inform you that gatherings of more than 6 people require prior approval." I stood there for a moment, processing what she'd just said. Community association? I'd lived here for 5 years and never heard of any such thing. The property had been in my family since before there even was a community to associate with. But something about the way she said it, with such absolute confidence in her authority, told me this woman was going to be a problem. What she didn't know was that she was also about to become a solution to a problem I didn't even know I had yet. You see, I was already starting to think about how someone this determined to control my dock might be willing to pay for the privilege. The next morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox. Inside was an official-looking document that read, "Violation Notice. Unauthorized use of community dock. You have 48 hours to pay $500 fine or face serious consequences. Signed, Lakeshore Community Association President, Rachel Smith." I held the paper, reading it twice to make sure I understood correctly. This woman was trying to fine me for using my own property. That's when I realized Rachel Smith wasn't just a problem neighbor. She was about to become the best business opportunity I'd ever stumbled into. The first thing I did was research this Lakeshore Community Association that Rachel claimed to represent. After spending an hour online and making a few phone calls to the county office, I discovered something fascinating. It didn't exist. No legal registration, no official status, no authority whatsoever. Rachel Smith had essentially crowned herself president of an imaginary organization and was now using that fictional title to try to control my property. The beautiful thing was she was creating a paper trail of her own scam with every fake notice she sent me. 2 days after the violation notice, Rachel showed up at my door again, this time with backup. She had Tom Bradley with her, though he looked about as comfortable as someone being forced to attend his own funeral. Rachel was carrying a clipboard and a measuring tape, acting like some kind of official inspector. "We need to discuss your dock situation," she announced, as if she were conducting a business meeting rather than trespassing on my property. I invited them to sit on my deck, curious to see just how deep this rabbit hole went. "Your dock affects everyone's property values," Rachel began, consulting her clipboard like it contained the secrets of the universe. "You're being selfish by hogging the best lake access in the area. It's not fair to the community." As she spoke, I noticed something interesting about her tone. There was a bitterness underneath her righteous indignation, a personal edge that suggested this wasn't really about community welfare at all. When I asked her what she thought would be fair, her answer revealed everything I needed to know about her true motivations. "People like me have been excluded from nice things our whole lives," Rachel said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "I've been renting that house for 3 years, watching you host parties on your fancy inherited property, while the rest of us get nothing. You didn't earn that, Doc. You just got lucky with your family connections. Meanwhile, people who actually need lake access have to go without, because you're too selfish to share." The mask was slipping, and I could see the real Rachel underneath. Someone who felt entitled to other people's property because life hadn't given her the same advantages. I realized then that Rachel's campaign wasn't about community rights or property values. It was about jealousy, pure and simple. She looked at my inherited cabin and saw everything she felt she deserved but couldn't afford. The fake HOA authority was just a tool to legitimize what was essentially an adult temper tantrum about not getting her way. This woman genuinely believed that wanting something badly enough should be sufficient grounds for taking it from someone else. She wanted me to either share the dock with all the neighbors or pay a monthly community contribution of $150. When I suggested a reasonable compromise, like just giving neighbors a heads up when I was planning larger gatherings, she rejected it immediately. This woman didn't want solutions. She wanted control and money, and she wanted them for the simple reason that she felt entitled to them. While Rachel was presenting her demands, Tom Bradley kept shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Eventually, he leaned over and whispered, "She made me come here, Daniel. I don't agree with any of this." That's when I learned something interesting about Rachel's community support. She'd been pressuring neighbors to back her crusade, promising them that once she got me to give up my dock rights, everyone would get free access to the lake. The problem with that promise was that she had no legal ability to deliver on it, which meant she was essentially running a con game on the entire neighborhood. After Rachel and Tom left, I decided to keep an eye on my property more carefully. What I discovered over the next few days was both infuriating and enlightening. Rachel was bringing strangers to my dock and charging them $40 each to use what she called the community boat launch. She'd set up a whole business operation on my property without my permission, keeping 100% of the profits while claiming it was for community benefit. The woman was literally stealing from me while lecturing me about community responsibility. I watched through my workshop window as Rachel conducted her illegal business. She'd developed quite the sales pitch, telling customers that the dock was a community resource that she managed on behalf of the neighborhood. She even had business cards, though I couldn't see what they said from my vantage point. What struck me most was how confident she seemed, as if she genuinely believed she had the right to profit from my property. That confidence was about to become very expensive for her. Instead of confronting Rachel immediately, I decided to document everything. I set up a few security cameras around the dock area, nothing fancy, just enough to record her activities. Every time she brought customers to my property, every cash transaction, every lie she told about owning the dock, it was all being recorded. I was building a case, but not for the police. I was building a case for the most beautiful form of justice I could imagine, making her pay market rate for what she'd been stealing. The more I watched Rachel's operation, the more impressed I became with her work ethic, if not her ethics. She was making somewhere between $200 and $400 per week off my dock, and she'd created a whole pricing structure, Locals paid $40, tourists paid $60, and weekends came with a premium rate. She was even keeping customer logs, creating a detailed record of the commercial value of my property. Rachel was essentially doing market research for the business I was going to force her to pay for. One evening, Tom Bradley stopped by my workshop while Rachel was busy with customers at the dock. "Daniel, I need to tell you something," he said, looking around nervously. "She's been collecting money from the neighbors too, $50 a month from each household for something she calls a legal defense fund. She told us the money would go toward fighting you in court, but I'm starting to wonder where it's really going." That's when I realized Rachel's scam was even bigger than I'd thought. She wasn't just stealing from me, she was stealing from everyone. The final piece of Rachel's operation revealed itself when she made a crucial mistake. She filed a complaint with the city about my boat workshop, claiming I was running an illegal commercial operation without proper zoning permits. When the city inspector showed up to investigate, he found that everything on my property was perfectly legal and had been grandfathered in decades before current zoning laws existed. But while he was there, he also witnessed Rachel conducting her actual illegal business operation. The inspector asked me if I wanted to press charges, but I told him no. I had something much better in mind than getting Rachel arrested. The day after the city inspector's visit, I found another letter from Rachel. This one claimed to be from something called the Community Legal Defense Committee and threatened me with a federal lawsuit for illegal monopolization of lake access. The letterhead looked official enough, but when I researched the address, it led right back to Rachel's rental house. She was creating increasingly elaborate fake organizations to support her harassment campaign, and each new letter was just more evidence for the case I was building against her. I decided it was time to take a more active role in Rachel's business education. She'd been advertising dock access through online classifieds, so I created a fake customer identity and responded to one of her ads. I called myself Mike from Minneapolis and expressed interest in bringing a boat up for the weekend. Rachel was immediately enthusiastic, offering me what she called premium lake access for $75 per day. We arranged to meet the following Saturday morning. Playing the role of Mike from Minneapolis was easier than I expected. I drove my truck to a parking spot about a quarter-mile away and walked back to the dock area, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. Rachel was waiting for me, practically bouncing with excitement at the prospect of another paying customer. "You're going to love this spot," she told me, gesturing toward my own dock like she was presenting a prize on a game show. "I manage community access here, and this is absolutely the best boat launch on the entire lake." I asked Rachel about the ownership situation, playing the role of a curious customer. "So this is public property?" I inquired. "Practically speaking, yes," she replied without hesitation. "The community voted me authority over lake access. The previous owner didn't understand the concept of sharing, but we've established community rights." I kept asking questions, and Rachel kept digging herself deeper. She admitted on my hidden recording device that she was collecting money, that she'd established community authority over the dock, and that she was managing access on behalf of the neighborhood. The most beautiful part of Rachel's confession was how detailed she got about her business model. She explained her pricing structure, her customer screening process, and her long-term plans for expanding access. "I'm hoping to eventually install a proper payment kiosk and maybe even a small snack stand," she told me. "This location has incredible commercial potential." I almost laughed out loud. Rachel was not only stealing from me, she was planning to expand her theft into a full-scale business operation. After I paid Rachel the $75 and got my receipt for dock access, I walked back to my truck with a recording that would change everything. Rachel had just admitted to running a business on property she didn't own, collecting money under false pretenses, and making plans for future commercial development without any legal authority. She'd also established the market value of dock access at $75 per day, which was going to be very useful information when I started charging her rent. That evening, Tom Bradley knocked on my workshop door with a concerned expression. "Daniel, I need to apologize for getting dragged into Rachel's schemes, and I need to tell you something important." He went on to explain that Rachel had collected $50 each from 6 different households for her fake legal defense fund. She'd promised the neighbors that once she won the lawsuit against me, everyone would get free dock access forever. The total amount she'd collected was $300, money that was supposed to go toward fighting me, but had actually gone straight into her personal account. The picture was becoming crystal clear. Rachel wasn't just some angry neighbor with boundary issues, she was running a systematic fraud operation that targeted both me and the entire community. She was stealing from my property, lying to customers about ownership, and embezzling money from neighbors under false pretenses. The beautiful irony was that every crime she committed just made my future victory more profitable and more satisfying. I spent the rest of the week documenting Rachel's activities with renewed purpose. I had videos of her conducting illegal business on my property, audio recordings of her admitting to fraud, and witness statements from neighbors who'd been scammed. But I still wasn't ready to play my hand. Rachel was going to make one more crucial mistake, and when she did, I was going to be ready to turn her from a thief into a paying customer. The opportunity came when Rachel got even more ambitious. She filed another complaint with the city, this time claiming that my boat restoration work violated zoning regulations. When the inspector came out for the second time, he was clearly annoyed at having to deal with what he correctly identified as neighbor harassment. After confirming again that all my activities were legal, he witnessed Rachel in the middle of conducting another illegal transaction. "Sir," he said to me, "that woman is clearly running an unauthorized business on your property. Are you sure you don't want to press charges?" I smiled and told him I had a better idea. 3 days after the second city inspection, I was working in my shop when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. I looked up to see Rachel marching toward my property with Officer Robert Dawson trailing behind her, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Rachel was practically vibrating with righteous indignation, carrying a folder full of papers and wearing an expression that suggested she thought she was about to deliver the ultimate justice. "Officer, I want to make a citizen's arrest," Rachel announced, pointing at me like I was a fugitive she'd tracked down. "This man is stealing from our entire community. He's illegally monopolizing the dock and running an unauthorized business." She was gesturing wildly with her folder, papers fluttering in the breeze like confetti at a very strange parade. Officer Dawson looked at Rachel, then at me, then back at Rachel, with the patient expression of someone who dealt with difficult people before. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to show me some evidence of community ownership before I can take any action," Officer Dawson said, his voice carefully neutral. Rachel's response was to launch into what could only be described as a performance art piece about maritime law and sovereign citizen rights. "As a sovereign lakeshore citizen, I hereby place this man under maritime arrest for violations of community water access statutes," she declared, apparently unaware that she was making up legal terminology as she went along. Officer Dawson's eyebrows rose slightly, which I was learning was his version of expressing complete incredulity. "Ma'am, there's no such thing as a sovereign lakeshore citizen, and we're not in maritime jurisdiction. This is a freshwater lake in Minnesota, not international waters. Also, citizen's arrests can only be made for felonies committed in your presence, and I don't see any evidence of felonious activity here." Rachel was undeterred by these minor details, like facts and actual law. "He's committed theft of community resources, which is clearly a felony under the Community Access Protection Act," she insisted, waving her folder like it contained official documentation rather than what I suspected were printouts of random internet articles about property rights. "I demand that you arrest him immediately and impound his illegal dock." "Ma'am," Officer Dawson said with admirable patience, "there is no Community Access Protection Act, and private docks cannot be impounded unless they violate specific environmental regulations. What I really need from you is proof that this dock belongs to the community rather than to Mr. Bailey here." That's when Rachel made her fatal error. Instead of producing documentation she didn't have, she launched into a passionate speech about community rights and moral obligations that revealed just how disconnected from reality she'd become. "Everyone knows this dock belongs to all of us. It's been shared property for years. Just because his name is on some old papers doesn't mean he can exclude the community. Property is theft, officer. This man is literally stealing from every family in this neighborhood." Rachel was getting more animated with each word, apparently believing that volume and passion could substitute for legal authority. Officer Dawson stopped her mid-rant with the kind of calm professionalism that suggested he'd dealt with similar delusions before. "Ma'am, that's exactly what property ownership means. Legal documentation determines ownership, not community feelings or philosophical beliefs about property being theft. If you have evidence that Mr. Bailey doesn't own this dock, I'd be happy to review it. Otherwise, you're essentially asking me to arrest someone for using their own property." I decided this was the perfect moment to present my evidence and watch Rachel's entire worldview collapse in real time. I calmly pulled out my phone and showed Officer Dawson the videos of Rachel collecting money from strangers on my property. "Robert, I've been documenting Rachel's business activities for several weeks now. She's been charging people $75 a day to use my dock, while telling them it's community property. I played the audio recording of Rachel admitting she was managing lake access and collecting payments. Officer Dawson's expression shifted from annoyed to interested, while Rachel's face went through what appeared to be all 5 stages of grief simultaneously. Rachel's reaction to seeing her own crimes played back was absolutely spectacular. Her face went through about 5 different colors before settling on an angry red that clashed horribly with her outfit. "This is a conspiracy," she shouted, apparently deciding that when facts fail, accusations of vast plots might work better. "You can't record people without permission. This is entrapment. I demand you arrest him for illegal surveillance." Officer Dawson calmly explained that recording someone conducting business on your own property was perfectly legal, and that entrapment only applied to law enforcement officers inducing people to commit crimes, not private citizens documenting crimes being committed against them. "Ma'am," he continued with the tone of someone explaining basic concepts to a particularly stubborn child, "it appears you've been operating a business on someone else's property without permission. That's theft of services at minimum, and possibly fraud depending on what you told your customers." The beautiful thing about Rachel's meltdown was how it perfectly demonstrated the difference between someone who was guilty and someone who was innocent. While she was screaming about conspiracies and unfair treatment, I was calmly presenting evidence and explaining facts. The contrast couldn't have been more clear if we'd planned it as an educational demonstration about how guilty people behave when confronted with evidence of their crime. Officer Dawson asked me what I wanted to do about the situation, and I gave him an answer that clearly surprised both him and Rachel. "I don't want to press charges, Robert. I want to offer Rachel a business proposition." The look of confusion on both their faces was worth every moment of harassment I'd endured over the past few months. You see, Rachel has spent weeks proving that my dock has significant commercial value. She's established a market rate of $75 per day, demonstrated consistent customer demand, and shown that people are willing to pay for quality lake access. Since she's so convinced that the dock should generate revenue, I'm willing to rent it to her for $200 per month. She can run her business legally as my tenant instead of illegally as a thief. The look on Rachel's face was worth every moment of harassment I'd endured. She went from righteous anger to confusion to the dawning realization that she was trapped by her own actions. "You want me to pay you?" she sputtered, apparently unable to process the concept that actions have consequences. "After everything I've done to establish community access?" I smiled and nodded, enjoying every second of her cognitive dissonance. "Rachel, you've established that dock access is worth at least $1,500 per month based on your own pricing. I'm offering you a below-market lease at $200 per month. That's a steal, considering you've already proven the business model works and demonstrated that customers are willing to pay premium rates for access." Officer Dawson was clearly enjoying the irony of the situation. "Ma'am, you have a choice here. You can accept Mr. Bailey's generous offer to legitimize your business through a rental agreement, or I can arrest you for theft of services, fraud, and filing false police reports. What's it going to be?" Rachel looked around desperately, as if someone might materialize to rescue her from the consequences of her own action. When no rescue came, reality finally began to penetrate her delusions about sovereign lakeshore citizenship and community property rights. For 3 months, Rachel paid her rent like clockwork. $200 appeared in my mailbox on the first of every month, along with increasingly passive-aggressive notes about the unfair terms of our agreement. She used the dock quietly, usually in the early morning when she thought no one was watching, and for a while I actually thought the problem might be solved. Rachel had learned her lesson, accepted her role as my tenant, and we'd all moved on with our lives. That's what I thought, anyway, until my security cameras caught her making the mistake that would cost her everything. It was a busy Saturday morning in late summer when I noticed unusual activity around the dock. Instead of Rachel's usual solo fishing trip, there were 3 different groups of people using the facility throughout the morning. I checked my camera footage and discovered that Rachel had gone back to her old business model, but with a twist. She was now subletting dock access to tourists for $50 per day, directly violating the personal use only clause in our rental agreement. The evidence was undeniable. I had video of Rachel collecting cash from multiple strangers, text message screenshots where she advertised premium lake access to weekend visitors, and recordings of her telling customers that she had exclusive management rights to the dock. She was keeping 100% of the profits while violating every term of our contract. The woman had learned nothing from our previous encounter except how to be more careful about her time. I waited until Monday morning to confront Rachel about her contract violation. I knocked on her door with a folder full of printed evidence and a calculator to help her understand the financial consequences of her actions. When she answered the door, I could see in her eyes that she knew exactly why I was there. "Rachel, we need to discuss your business activities this weekend," I said, holding up the printed photos of her transactions. Her first instinct was to deny everything. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. I showed her the videos, the text messages, and the witness statements from neighbors who'd seen her bringing customers to the dock. According to our contract, violation of the personal use clause results in immediate termination of the lease plus a penalty fee of $1,000. You also forfeit your security deposit of $2,400. Rachel's second instinct was to justify her actions. "I need the extra money to afford your ridiculous rent," she protested. "It's not fair to charge so much for something that should be shared with the community." I had to appreciate the irony of her complaint. "So you're admitting that you were stealing a valuable service before we signed the contract?" I asked. "And now you're upset that you have to pay market rate for something you used to get for free?" The math was simple and brutal. Rachel owed me the forfeited security deposit of $2,400, plus the penalty fee of $1,000, plus the remaining 8 months of rent she'd agreed to pay up front, which came to $1,600. Total, $5,000, payable within 30 days, or she'd face fraud charges and immediate eviction from her rental house for conducting illegal business activities. Rachel tried every negotiation tactic she could think of. She offered to pay extra rent going forward, promised to never violate the contract again, and even suggested we could become business partners in a legitimate dock rental operation. I rejected every proposal with the same simple response. "You had a perfectly reasonable deal and you chose to violate it. Now you pay the consequences we both agreed to when you signed the contract." The beautiful thing about Rachel's situation was that she had no legal recourse. She'd signed a clear contract with explicit penalty clauses, violated those terms while conducting illegal business activities, and been caught red-handed with overwhelming evidence. Any lawyer would have told her to pay up and consider herself lucky that I wasn't pressing criminal charges. The woman who'd spent months trying to steal from me was now legally obligated to pay me $5,000 for the privilege of having learned an expensive lesson. Tom Bradley stopped by that evening to check on the situation. "I heard Rachel's moving out," he said. "Is it true that she owes you $5,000? I confirmed the details, and Tom just shook his head in amazement. "You know, Daniel, when this whole thing started, I thought you were just going to call the police and have her arrested. I never imagined you'd turn her into a customer and then make her pay penalties for bad behavior." That's the most creative justice I've ever seen. The next 3 weeks were fascinating to watch. Rachel scrambled to raise $5,000 through every means available to her. She sold her car, borrowed money from relatives, took on extra work shifts, and probably had to explain to everyone why she suddenly needed such a large amount of cash. Every day that passed was another reminder of the expensive lessons she was learning about the consequences of trying to steal from people who are smarter than you. On the last day of the 30-day deadline, Rachel appeared at my door with an envelope full of cash. Her hands were shaking as she counted out $5,000 in 20s, 50s, and hundreds, the physical representation of her complete and total defeat. I counted the money slowly, making sure every bill was accounted for, while Rachel stood there watching her hard-earned cash change hands. "Thank you for your business, Rachel," I said as I handed her a receipt. "I hope this experience has been educational." The $5,000 Rachel paid me wasn't just money, it was startup capital for the most satisfying business venture I'd ever undertaken. Combined with the $2,400 security deposit and the $600 in rent she'd actually paid, I had a total of $8,000 that had come directly from the woman who'd tried to steal my property. There was something beautifully poetic about using a thief's money to build a legitimate business on the very property she'd tried to claim. I used Rachel's unwilling investment to transform my simple family dock into a proper boat rental facility. I installed professional-grade lighting for evening use, improved the parking area, and added security features that would protect both the property and the customers. The irony wasn't lost on me that Rachel's illegal business model had actually been pretty sound. She'd just been running it on someone else's property without permission. Now I was going to do it right, and she'd funded the whole operation. The business took off immediately. Word spread through the lake community that Bailey's Boat Launch offered premium access with fair pricing and professional management. Unlike Rachel's fly-by-night operation, I had proper insurance, legal permits, and a reputation for honest dealing. During peak season, I was earning $1,500 per month in rental fees, plus additional income from boat storage and minor repair services. Rachel had inadvertently proven that there was strong market demand for quality lake access. Tom Bradley became my first official business partner after witnessing the entire Rachel saga from start to finish. "Daniel, I've never seen anyone turn a problem into a profit center like you did," he told me. "If you're looking for investors, I'd like to buy in." Tom's hardware store knowledge proved invaluable for maintenance and improvements, and his reputation in the community helped attract customers who might have been skeptical of a newer operation. 6 months after Rachel's final payment, I received a phone call that proved some people never learn their lessons, no matter how expensive those lessons become. "Hi Daniel, this is Rachel," the voice said, as if we were old friends catching up. "I wanted to talk to you about a potential business opportunity." I put the call on speaker and leaned back in my chair, curious to see just how deep the rabbit hole of Rachel's delusion really went. "I've been thinking about our previous arrangement," Rachel continued, "and I believe there might be room for us to work together in a mutually beneficial way. I have experience managing lake access, and you have the property. We could potentially split the profits 50-50 on a new rental operation." I had to admire her audacity, even as I marveled at her complete failure to understand the situation. "Rachel," I said, "are you referring to your experience of stealing from me and then paying me $5,000 in penalties?" The conversation that followed was a masterclass in delusional thinking. Rachel genuinely seemed to believe that her months of theft, fraud, and harassment had somehow qualified her as a business partner rather than a cautionary tale. She talked about learning from past mistakes and bringing valuable experience to the table, apparently unaware that her experience consisted entirely of getting caught, defeated, and financially destroyed by the person she was now trying to partner with. I let Rachel finish her pitch before delivering my response. "Rachel, I appreciate the call, but I prefer customers who pay their bills up front rather than partners who steal money and then get caught. My business is doing great with honest customers and reliable partners. I think you'd be better served focusing on your own financial recovery rather than planning new ventures that might not work out as well as you hope." After hanging up on Rachel, I called Tom Bradley to share the story. His response was everything I'd hoped for. Uncontrollable laughter, followed by genuine amazement at Rachel's persistent lack of self-awareness. "She actually thinks you'd want to work with her?" he asked. "After everything that happened, that woman is either the most optimistic person on earth or the most delusional." I suggested it was probably a combination of both, with a heavy emphasis on the delusional part. The business continued to grow throughout that first full season. Property values in the area increased as word spread about the quality lake access available to residents and visitors. The neighbors who'd initially been pressured to support Rachel's harassment campaign became some of my best customers and biggest supporters. They'd learned firsthand about the difference between illegal schemes and legitimate business operations, and they appreciated dealing with someone who honored agreements rather than violating them. By the end of the season, I'd earned more than $20,000 in revenue from the dock rental business. All of it built on the foundation that Rachel had inadvertently provided through her theft and subsequent payments. Every month brought new customers who'd heard about the reliable service and fair pricing, creating a sustainable business model that would continue generating income for years to come. Rachel had wanted to control my dock for free. Instead, she'd funded its transformation into the most successful boat rental operation on the lake. The annual reunion that fall was particularly sweet. My 12 college buddies returned to find not just a peaceful weekend retreat, but a thriving business that had grown from the ashes of neighbor harassment. We grilled fish, told stories, and marveled at how a simple call to 911 had ultimately led to financial success and community respect. "You know," one of my friends said, "when that crazy lady called the cops on us last year, I thought this place was going to become a war zone. Instead, you turned her into your best customer." I raised my beer and toasted to the power of patience, documentation, and letting your enemies defeat themselves. 1 year after Rachel's final payment, I was running a dock rental business that had exceeded every expectation I'd set when the whole ordeal began. The operation was generating consistent monthly income, the property value had increased substantially, and the community had transformed from a source of conflict into a network of supportive customers and friends. Every aspect of my life had improved as a direct result of Rachel's attempt to destroy it, which struck me as perhaps the most perfect form of justice imaginable. The business had grown beyond simple dock rentals into a comprehensive lake access service. I offered boat storage, minor repair work, fishing guide services, and equipment rentals, all built on the customer base that had discovered the facility through word-of-mouth recommendations. Tom Bradley had become a full partner, contributing both investment capital and operational expertise that helped us expand faster than I could have managed alone. We were booked solid through the summer season and had a waiting list for premium services. What made the success even sweeter was knowing that every dollar of profit could be traced back to Rachel's unwilling contribution to the startup costs. The woman who'd tried to steal my property had instead funded its transformation into a legitimate business enterprise. Her theft had provided the evidence I needed to force her into a rental agreement. Her contract violations had generated penalty payments, and her illegal activities had demonstrated the market demand that made expansion profitable. The community transformation was just as satisfying as the financial success. Neighbors who'd initially been intimidated by Rachel's aggressive tactics had learned to appreciate the difference between legitimate business operations and fraudulent schemes. They'd seen how documented evidence and patient strategy could defeat bullying and harassment without resorting to escalation or revenge. The annual neighborhood barbecue had become a celebration of peaceful coexistence and mutual respect, rather than a gathering overshadowed by conflict. Tom Bradley and I were reviewing the year's financial statements when the phone rang with what would turn out to be the final chapter in the Rachel Smith saga. "Daniel, you're not going to believe this," said Officer Robert Dawson. "I just got a call from a police department in Wisconsin. They've arrested someone for running a boat rental scam at a public lake, and when they ran her name through the system, your case came up as a reference. Apparently, she was telling people she had permission to rent dock access at a state park." The details of Rachel's Wisconsin adventure were both predictable and pathetic. She'd moved to a small lake town and immediately tried to recreate her illegal business model, this time targeting tourists who wanted to use a public boat launch. She'd been charging $25 per day for premium parking near the dock, claiming she was an authorized agent of the Park Service. The scheme had lasted about 2 weeks before park rangers caught her and discovered she had no connection to the facility whatsoever. "The best part," Officer Dawson continued, "is that when they arrested her, she tried to explain that she had experience managing lake access in Minnesota. She actually used your situation as a reference, claiming she'd successfully operated a boat rental business here. The Wisconsin cops called me to verify her story, and I had to explain that her successful operation consisted of stealing from you until you forced her to pay $5,000 in penalties." I thanked Officer Dawson for the update and immediately called Tom to share the news. We both agreed that Rachel's latest arrest was the perfect ending to her story of expensive education in property rights and business ethics. She'd learned nothing from her Minnesota experience except how to find new ways to get caught breaking the same laws in different states. Some people, it seemed, were determined to learn every lesson the hard way, regardless of how much those lessons cost. The call from Wisconsin got me thinking about the broader implications of Rachel's behavior. In her mind, she'd probably convinced herself that she was the victim of our encounter, rather than the perpetrator of multiple crimes. She'd likely rationalized her theft as community activism and her penalties as unfair persecution, which explained why she'd immediately tried to recreate the same illegal activities in a new location. People like Rachel never really learn. They just find new targets and new justifications for the same destructive behavior. That evening, as I was closing up the dock facility after another busy day of legitimate business, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that first 911 call. What had started as a simple neighbor dispute had evolved into a masterclass in turning problems into opportunities. Rachel's harassment had forced me to document my property rights. Her theft had demonstrated market demand for dock access, and her penalties had provided startup capital for a business I'd never planned to create. The final irony was that Rachel had gotten exactly what she'd originally wanted, just not in the way she'd expected. She'd wanted to control lake access and profit from dock usage. Instead, she'd created a situation where someone else controlled lake access and profited from dock usage using her own money. She'd wanted to teach me a lesson about community sharing. Instead, she'd learned an expensive lesson about property rights and legal consequences. Every goal she'd set for herself had been achieved by her intended victim rather than herself. As I locked up the facility and headed back to my cabin, I thought about the 12 college buddies who'd innocently triggered this entire saga by simply eating grilled fish at my annual reunion. They'd return in a few months to find that their quiet weekend retreat had become the headquarters of a thriving business empire, all because one angry neighbor had made the mistake of calling 911 about too many guests. Rachel Smith had tried to destroy my peaceful lake life and instead had funded my early retirement plan. The lesson, I realized, wasn't just about standing up to bullies or protecting property rights. It was about the power of patience, documentation, and strategic thinking in the face of seemingly overwhelming harassment. Rachel had all the advantages when our conflict began. She had community support, apparent legal authority, and the initiative of the first attack. But she'd also had greed, dishonesty, and a fundamental misunderstanding of both law and human nature. In the end, those character flaws had been more powerful than any tactical advantage she'd possessed. And that's how a 911 call about 12 guys eating fish turned into an $8,000 windfall in a thriving boat rental business. Rachel thought she could bully me into giving up my family's dock, but instead she became my first unwilling investor and my most expensive customer. Sometimes karma doesn't just come around, sometimes it comes with a business plan and monthly revenue projections. If you enjoyed this story of strategic revenge and poetic justice, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of bullies learning expensive lessons. And Rachel, if you're watching this from whatever jail cell you're currently occupying, I want you to know that my business is doing great. Thanks for asking.